Welcome to the Ambassador series at brandylibrary.tv. Today we talk about Scotch, more specifically single malt Scotch. And Bowmore it is, with Kristina here.
Thanks, Flavian. Hi, I'm Kristina Sutter. I'm the brand ambassador for Bowmore Single Malt Scotch from Islay, one of my favorite regions of Scotland and one of the most beautiful, I think.
I agree.
So, Flavian, have you tried both of these Bowmores here?
I think I've tried just about all of them, but I'm always happy to try again.
Excellent. Okay, well, let me just start with a couple things that I really love about Bowmore and why I was so excited to work on this. A long time ago when I worked for some other brands, the question that I got a lot was, what do you drink at home that you don't work on? And the Bowmore 15 was actually always my standard answer. Now that I work on it, I have to recognize some others. Bowmore was the first distillery on Islay. Islay, spelled I-S-L-A-Y, pronounced Islay, not. So Islay is a very mystical, magical, beautiful kind of place and ideal for making very flavorful, delicious whiskeys. They're typically known for being the peaty, earthy, smoky whiskeys, and that's mostly a decision and tradition at the distilleries. Bowmore, as far as flavor goes, and I really love to just focus on the flavor, we'll give you a few special notes on the distillery itself and what sets it apart. But Bowmore, the whiskey, is recognized as being the most balanced of those flavors on Islay. So Islay can definitely give you the smoke and the peat, period. But it can also range very much in flavor. And for the true smoky whiskey drinkers, they get the range of, okay, it's smoky peaty,
but it's not just that.
It can be rich and dried fruits and coffee beans and dark chocolate and leathery and really big and rich in those flavors.
I believe this is why Bowmore is quite successful here. It's because it's got a lot to see.
Yes.
You can catch some sweetness. You can catch the very rich, deep wood aromas of where the cask they come from. But there's some freshness to it too. It's citrusy as well. It's always long. It's very balanced, as you said.
Yes, because it, like you said, it brings out the brightness of kind of the other end of the spectrum of Islay flavor profiles, which is the brininess, the sea salt, the sea air, the shellfish, the iodine, the seaweed, and all of those big but bright flavors. So you take the richness and the brightness, and Bowmore lies somewhere in the middle, giving you the richness with the wood and the peat and the earth, and giving you the obvious flavors of the sea and the salt and the air, but less of the iodine, less of the rich fruits, and just balancing out the flavors that are coming from the peat, from the stills, and of course, from the wood.
Well, that being said, I feel like having a little bit.
Yeah. Sorry. Don't ever want to leave you waiting. So we're going to start here with the Bowmore Tempest. I am going to recommend adding a dash of water to this. Okay. Feel free to nose it and taste it neat if you prefer. This is just about cask strength.
Just to see the difference,
Yes. So Bowmore Tempest is an interesting one. For people that really love the Islay whiskeys and the smokiness, the peat comes into play at the very, very beginning of the process when we're drying out the barley. Peat is not an ingredient of Scotch, nor does it come into physical contact with any of the only 3 ingredients of Scotch. So saying that, with it being at the very beginning of the process, the longer an Islay whiskey is aged, the less of the smoke and the peat you're really going to identify in the whiskey, because the more of the wood is going to take over. So bottling the Bowmore Tempest at 10 years old lets the distillery character shine through, lets the smoke speak for itself, but the wood chosen for the Bowmore Tempest is 100% first fill bourbon barrels. So when we say in Scotland, first fill, we mean the first time with Scotch. There's always going to have been something in there beforehand. In this case, it was bourbon. And we know that most bourbons are typically aged only 2, 4, maybe 6 years, but not a lot more. So this is still very, very ripe wood with a lot of flavor to give. So marrying the notes that you get from very fresh American oak casks, so lots of caramel, lots of vanilla, lots of those bourbon notes still there to be had.
It's very intense.
It is very, very intense.
No harshness, no immaturity.
No. and then the smoke still comes through, and being bottled at cask strength lets the alcohol
Vibrant
really
nose.
come through and delivers the aroma and the flavors very well. And then adding a dash of water, of course, as we know, is what's going to round it out for us. And that gives you a lot of the rich vanilla bean, milky chocolate, and a little bit of orange zest. That's going to come from the cask strength and just being 10 years old. You know, there's going to be a lot of flavors that speak for itself.
See, I'll add a little more because I didn't add enough. I think
the
that
best
should now do
answer
it.
that I've heard to the question of how much water should you add was from a distiller himself, just saying, add it till you like it. Just add it till it tastes good. You're never going to harm your whiskey by adding water. You know, the generic answer is that adding water is going to enhance the aroma and release the bouquet. We hear that every day. And it does that, and that's true. But what I like to tell people is that adding the water is going to soften it up. Like if you have a generic dry sponge and you add a little bit of water to that, it's going to expand and get softer. That's what you want to happen on your palate. The alcohol molecule combines with the water molecule, creating a larger molecule that's going to roll more evenly across your palate and deliver the flavor in a balanced way rather than just pinpricks of alcohol. So now you're really getting to experience what this whiskey is meant to taste like.
Now, isn't there a risk when you add too much water to kind of drown it and lose a bit of the intensity? I like your method of going little by little because this way you can really reach the peak. Sometimes, I know some people say add as much water as you have of amount of scotch.
Sometimes.
Does it work with all of those?
Well, it's only a risk if you don't have more whiskey to add to the glass in case you've added too much water. Never a risk in my house. More than welcome to come
play
over.
with water, but always have some
Don't drown
extra
it.
scotch on the side.
Yes, always. Yeah, so I think when we are analyzing whiskeys and trying whiskeys for the first time and coming up with tasting notes and doing comparisons, I absolutely add the same amount of water as the whiskey that I have in my glass. But when I'm enjoying a sip of whiskey and drinking whiskey socially, I do just add a few drops because I really like the flavor of whiskey. But for people that are just trying to get into it, not really sure what to do, don't feel silly. Add as much as you like. The flavor is still going to come through. This is bottled. This one is bottled at 56% alcohol by volume. But most single malt scotches are bottled at 43% ABV, so 86 proof. So this is still a very high proof that's going to be able to stand up to some water. You don't need to be scared. You know, this isn't watering down wine. That's on average 13% alcohol by volume. So
now, so you talked about the 100% first fill ex-bourbon barrels on that Tempest. What about the rest of the line? Generally speaking, where does Bowmore stand in terms of wood management?
That's a really great question. To be fair, all of the 98 distilleries in Scotland have good wood management programs. Everyone has come to realize since these distilleries were starting in the 1700s and 1800s that all of the color is going to come from the barrel that it's in, and depending on who you're talking to, about 65 to 75% of all the aroma and flavor is going to come from the wood that it's in. So it's a very important piece, and therefore should get a very large piece of the budget for these distilleries. So Bowmore does like to talk about the fact that they are in the top of the industry standard in spending for their wood management program, and that holds true for their sister distilleries as well. So we're definitely sourcing what we consider to be the best wood to bring out the best flavors in our whiskey. And it's going to be different for several of them.
Sherry barrels.
That means ex-sherry barrels. So the European oak, a little bit more sensitive and rich and full in flavor. Very fresh American oak barrels, and specifically when we want them, some second, third fill American oak barrels, because each of those is going to bring different flavors to the whiskey and for the different bottlings. And speaking of that, if you're ready to move on to another one, the Bowmore 15-year-old, which also used to be referred to as Bowmore Darkest, got the name because it uses a lot of the sherry oak barrels.
Hence the
so
color.
This is a fun comparison here. Yeah, the sherry oak is always going to give a darker color to the whiskey. Kind of easy to tell looking at a clear glass bottle, which ones have some sherry influence and which ones are all American.
I must say, I love the copper lines to it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Just reminiscent of the stills themselves. So the 15-year-old was a favorite of mine because half this liquid spends its last 3 full years in first fill sherry casks. So the average finishing of a whiskey, when you talk about additional cask enhancements, double woods, cask finishings of other woods, that's usually about 6-9 months, maybe up to a year. So we're talking 3 full years, and not just European oak. This is first fill sherry barrel. So the sherry itself was in there only a few months prior. So that takes the peatiness and the earthiness and the smokiness of your standard Bowmore 12-year-old and rounds it out with a really rich, full flavor. Not every whiskey can stand up to sherry finishing.
Yeah, definitely.
There are plenty that have some port finishings, and you can really see the difference and what that brings out and how that might enhance the whiskey the best. I personally am not a huge fan of all the overly sherried whiskeys, but from the islands, so when we're talking Islay, when we're talking Skye, when we're talking these whiskeys that already have a lot of rich, full flavor, and most importantly, complexity, the additional cask enhancement of some sherry wood actually does some amazing things to the whiskey.
Yeah.
So for this one, keeping all the snobbery out of it, I refer to the Bowmore 15-year-old as my breakfast whiskey.